Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Welcome, Ruth Kriz, to the Healing Grove podcast. I am so grateful that you agreed to be on this forum again. You've spoken to the membership once before, but I really wanted to get you out there to the larger world because I feel like you're one of the people who is doing cutting edge work that is so far ahead of its time that like nobody even knows about it yet. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of the things I've learned.
Heck yeah. So everyone, this is Ruth Kriz. She's a nurse practitioner who's identified a group of common genetic variations that helps explain why some people get really, really sick from chronic infections. So I was one of those people. Ruth and I didn't know each other when I was sick, but in retrospect, I've learned now why I went down so hard with Lyme disease. And it wasn't just because I was eating gluten, people. There are other things that are going on. So Ruth's really been one of my teachers in this realm, and the main teacher, I would say. And I'm learning at her feet kind of every week because I have, as you know, a lot of patients who need what you offer. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Ruth before we'll let her tell her story. So she had her own mystery illness, which she's going to tell us about, and it kind of led her down this path. She worked for 30 years clinically, helping patients heal from very complex conditions, interstitial cystitis being kind of one of the main ones, but a lot of Lyme, a lot of other things, because it turns out people don't just get infections in one part of their body. They often get them everywhere when they have these genetic variations. She's taught LPNs, nurse practitioners, all manner of practitioners. And since she closed her private practice, she's really shifted to focusing on teaching practitioners like myself how to understand these genetic variations so that they can help their patients get well, really, using simple and effective tools. I also want to mention that she holds 4 national records in powerlifting for her age and weight class. I won't tell you her age. If you were to guess her age, check it out. If you were to guess her age, you'd be 20 years off. I'll just say that, please. So Ruth is just kind of an all-around rock star, and I'm happy to call her a friend and grateful to be her student. And I'm happy that you agreed to speak with us. So thanks, Ruth.
Oh, it is a delight. There's so many different pieces to this complex puzzle. And the one that we have honed in on for today has to do with pH. And this isn't something that people focus on or talk about a lot. But I think it's a real key point if we're going to know how to be healthy. This is sort of something that runs in our bodies in the background, and we don't always even think about it. Occasionally people will go to a practitioner who says, oh, your body should be alkaline, and go on this diet. And they think that that's good for everybody. Well, is it really? There's sort of a background framework here that I'd like to set up, that it's one thing to know a piece of information, but that doesn't necessarily mean you understand it. I think about being in school and having classes where they had mathematical formulas, and I could memorize the formula. That didn't necessarily mean I understood it or when to use it, just because I could memorize it. And so much when it comes to medicine and understanding how our bodies work, we have lots of pieces of information, but we don't always know what to do with that information. We don't know what it means or whether it's important or not. And even if we figure out, well, gee, this should be important, we still don't quite know how to use it in our own lives. So when we talk about pH today, I do want to talk about what we know about it, try to increase your understanding of how it works in the body, and then at the end come up with some practical applications for things that could be helpful in working through complex illness based on how your body's pH is impacting those things.
I love that plan. And I'm glad you brought up the concept of knowledge versus understanding and application. It kind of gets to sort of the science of medicine and then the art of medicine, right? The art of medicine is the piece that people don't often see going on, but it's where we're taking all these sort of data points and really integrating them, because there's no one right way for every person. And you have to be able to.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's hard. I'm not even sure you can teach it. You know, it comes from a lot of experience. It comes from observing how people respond and not just following a one recipe or one set protocol fitting everybody. And then, well, if you didn't get better with what I do, then I can't help you. But being willing to problem solve and explore what is different about each individual, and then fine tuning your approach to meet their needs.
Ruth, do you think any of your own personal journey brought you to this kind of place? I would call it a place of wisdom in medicine, really. Like, you have so many facts at your disposal, but you're also so savvy in terms of how you interpret and explain and implement in different cases. And I think a lot of people, a lot of doctors and nurses and practitioners really often get to that place after they've had their own complex kind of condition. Would you be willing to talk about what you went through a little bit?
Oh, certainly. When I was in my 20s, I had 4 blood clots in my left leg. And that was kind of a mystery. 20-year-olds aren't supposed to be getting blood clots. And it was just kind of treated like you treat anybody with a blood clot and go have a good life. When I was in my
Wait,
30s.
nobody wanted to work that up? Like, nobody wanted to dig in there and figure out why you might be getting blood clots?
No, but this was also kind of the dark ages. I mean, we're talking about the 1970s. That gives you a hint as to how old I am. Um, and so the only anticoagulant we had was Coumadin, and I was put on that for a number of months, and then nothing happened until I had the next clotting event, and when we just kept repeating this procedure over and over again, but nobody was necessarily thinking about, why is this 20-year-old supposedly healthy woman getting blood clots?
Wow.
In my 30s, I started developing urinary issues. Later was diagnosed as interstitial cystitis. And I also had 4 miscarriages. And 3 of those 4 were in the first trimester, in which I clotted off the placenta and lost those babies. And once again, they said, well, you're old. I mean, it's kind of funny that if you're over 30 and you have a first pregnancy, that you're called an elderly primipara.
Advanced
So
in
I
the
guess
age.
so I guess I qualified. But so there were lots of things that went on medically in which nobody thought about why. Why would other people have a urinary tract infection, get 3 to 5 days of an antibiotic and be better? I would do exactly what they had done, and I was still miserable for 11 years. And so we're just back to how we think about problems and how we solve them.
Mhm.
And mine were not solved. And so that motivated me, since nobody else was going to do it, to start digging on my own. And it has led me down this amazing path of not only looking at the genetic connections, of which one of them we're going to talk about today with the pH issue, but also realizing that we are not all created equal. We all have a different genetic hand. We have different environmental exposures. We have different stresses in our life, and that impacts how our body functions and how it handles infections and other things that make our quality of life a different experience than some other people.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for
let's dig into it.
Before we dig in, I just want to thank
Ah.
you. I've never heard all the details of that, and I'm so sorry for your losses. I didn't know about that part. But it certainly does, in my mind, if you came to me as a patient and you said, I have this history, I would now, only since knowing you and what you've taught me, been able to say, oh my goodness, with that history, we absolutely need to look for some genetic variations in your clotting. So I hate that you had to live through that, but what you've learned and gained from that experience will help many.
Well, there's an expression, if life gives you a lemon, you make lemonade. And I don't believe that things happen to us without a reason.
Yeah.
And then what we do with those experiences is our choice. And I chose to, instead of making it a negative experience, make it something positive, that other people don't have to go through what I went through.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Let's dig in now. Do you want me to share the picture of the
If you
pH?
could, sure. Sure. We're just going to start out basically about what is pH. It's a scale. It's a way of measuring and assigning numbers to something to indicate how acidic it is or how basic it is. You can see from the diagram, battery acid is a 0, stomach acid is a 1. And then some foods, lemon, tomato, vinegar, coffee, milk are more on the acid side. Water is considered neutral at 7.0, but I will tell you that there are some waters with different pH. Reverse osmosis water is more acidic, and Fuji water is more alkaline. If you're concerned about the pH of the water that you drink. Blood is actually more on the alkaline side at an 8, baking soda a 9. When they use stomach tablets here, what they're talking about is Tums and things like that. And then we have soap that's fairly alkaline at 12. Bleach is even more alkaline at 13. And then we have drain cleaner at 14. So this is a whole scale here, but it can be used to measure with test strips. You can measure your pH of your vagina, the urine, saliva. Lots of things can be tested in a human body with what its pH is, but don't get fooled. For instance, lemon and the citrus fruits are pretty acid, but once the body metabolizes it, it leaves an alkaline ash and can actually raise your urine pH.
Yeah, that's something I've always been sort of confused about. I mean, I know that the teaching is you can put lemon in your water to alkalinize your body, but it also puts acid right into your stomach. So it really has to do with the transition from stomach to body. And is vinegar the same way? Because I know apple cider vinegar is often used in the same way.
Yep. So just looking at a substance by itself outside of a person may not be what it does once you consume it.
I just want to make a comment while we're here because stomach acid is obviously so low here. And a lot of people are taking things to block the production of acid in their stomach. I know how I feel about that. I'm curious to know how you feel about that.
I don't think it's a good idea. We're going to talk about the pH and effect it has on certain bacteria. And Barry Marshall, in his discovery of H. pylori, was almost booted out of the medical profession because everybody made the assumption that no self-respecting bacteria could ever survive in the stomach acid of a 1. And what they weren't taking into account was when people start taking H2 blockers, PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, and doing other things to alter baking soda, used to be real popular for upset stomachs and reflux and all kinds of things and heartburn. They were actually altering the stomach acid pH to be more alkaline. That more alkaline environment favored the growth of H. pylori. And so they were actually promoting stomach ulcers by altering the stomach pH. So I think long-term use of any of those products could set you up for infection that could lead to ulceration or other stomach issues. We have other bowel issues as well when we start talking about SIBO and dysbiosis in the gut. Those are all connected to these pH issues as well.
Wow. So right now, I think a PPI is still part of the kind of triple regimen that people use when they're told what to do to get rid of their H. pylori. I believe they're still using acid blockers as part of that. Why would that be?
I don't understand that thinking either.
Okay, just making sure we're on the same
Yeah,
page.
maybe there's some good literature on that. My default is I do bladders.
Fair enough. All right. So, let's talk a little bit more about, so you've talked about pH inside the body. I know a lot of people are using things like lemon water or foods to try to alter their pH, often to make it more alkaline. Can you speak to that and sort of food contributions to?
Sure. Let me back up a little bit further to the soil, because that's where food comes from. That's where it's grown. The ideal pH of soil is actually between 6 and 7. And when it gets more acid than that, it's not going to have as much calcium and magnesium. And if it gets above that 6 to 7 range, the other, particularly some of the metals, iron, manganese, copper, and zinc, get bound up and are no longer available to the growing plant. So not only do we have soils that are depleted in some of these essential nutrients because of overuse and not replenishing it with, chemical fertilizers aren't going to put those minerals back. But we really aren't getting it in the food. So when we start talking about a healthy diet, for years, the big mantra was, well, you can get everything you need if you eat a healthy diet. And Americans waste too much money on supplements and vitamins, and they're just going to poop it out. And it's a waste of money. And yet the reality is that they aren't going to get it in the foods the way foods are being grown currently. And I have not looked for a study to see if organic foods do any better. I would like to hope so. I just haven't seen any studies that have looked at that.
Yeah, yeah. And people, I don't know about you, but a lot of my patients have a hard time kind of accepting this because they're like, look, if I'm eating a healthy diet, I'm eating lots of leafy greens and it's just a sad reality that our farming practices and the lack of regenerative farming practices that we still have, even though we sort of know this now, the food is just not as nutrient dense as it once was.
Exactly.
How's that showing up in your patient population? Like, what are you seeing clinically as a result of this lack of mineralization and proper nutrition?
I see a lot of thyroid issues because of iodine deficiency. Not only does the thyroid gland need iodine, but breast tissue. I swear every woman with fibrocystic breast disease is deficient in iodine. I see for healing, zinc is essential to healing. The calcium and magnesium certainly play a huge role with osteoporosis. And that's also, we're going to talk a fair amount about the pH issue and how that plays into it and some of the myths associated with, you know, the all I can think of is the propaganda. Maybe that's too strong a word, by the milk industry that, you know, if you have osteoporosis, you have to drink a lot of milk. So
Wait,
there's
that's not the case? Is that not true?
sorry.
Yeah,
But
let's break that down because people,
yeah,
there are people
so
on
I
this
guess what I'm
podcast.
saying is that there's a lot of misinformation out there about some of these nutrients. Even if you are getting enough calcium in your diet, the modern diet, because of the pH issues and some of the vitamin D issues, which is another layer to this, so you can absorb the calcium. There's an article that estimated that the consumer of the modern diet can lose as much as 480 grams over 20 years, or half your skeletal muscle mass. And I think we have to think about this. I was just thinking about, I don't remember my aunts or uncles or grandparents or any of them having osteoporosis. I don't remember hearing about people breaking hips or needing hip replacements. Maybe I was just oblivious, but I've been in the medical community since I was a candy striper in high school, and we just didn't see that. And now, so many women and even some men are developing osteoporosis, and hip replacements are just kind of considered routine. I went back for a high school gathering to celebrate as a group I'm giving it away, 75th birthday this past year. And I wanted to talk about my lifting, and they wanted to talk about their pacemakers and hip replacements. And it was kind of shocking to me that was so commonplace. And so we have to start thinking intentionally about, why is this happening? And the pH issue is going to play into what gets absorbed and what gets saved by the body to go healthy places, and what ends up in the urinary tract being dumped or going into kidney stones. So this is a big deal that we aren't putting the pieces of the puzzle together. We have this kind of an information that we think, oh, this is good for you and this is bad for you, but we don't know how the pieces fit together.
Yeah, so let's put some pieces together, because I think this is a really relevant topic for most people. And I, for one, am currently at an age where I'm very interested in osteoporosis and preventing it. And you know, the usual things which are, you know, being told to women, about women in particular, even though now you're right, everyone's kind of at risk, about how to prevent this, are just kind of don't sit well with me. And the drugs that are being used to, you know, prevent osteoporosis or, you know, osteopenia from becoming osteoporosis don't sit well with me either. So I'm really hoping to walk away with some of my puzzle put together here. But let's continue. Let me let you go on. What else is
Okay.
important for us to know
Well, this
background?
is a piece of the puzzle. I will not tell you that it's the whole piece with osteoporosis, because it is very complex and there are genetic factors that do play into it. I have to completely agree with you that a lot of the medications aren't really doing the job. They are maybe slowing down the rate of bone loss, but they don't necessarily rebuild the bone. Whereas one of the reasons I started lifting was if you stress the bone with weight-bearing exercise, it'll tell the body to put the calcium back in the bone, particularly if you have enough vitamin D to absorb the calcium and enough vitamin K to signal the calcium to go attached to the bone. I mean, I knew for years that I was a calcium dumper. I didn't quite know what that meant. And nobody told me how to fix it. So there are some issues here.
Ruth, how did you know that? How did you know that for years?
Because when I had my routine blood work done, my calcium levels came back high in the high 9s and early 10 and low 10s, and they looked at my parathyroid hormone and it was fine.
So in other words, you were taking calcium out of bone, putting it into your blood, and is that what you mean? Your
I was
level?
putting it in, it was coming out my urine.
That was a urine. Okay, your calcium level
My
in your
blood level was high, my urine was high.
which presumably means
results in osteoporosis. Yeah, I mean, I had severe osteoporosis. At age 50, I had the bones of an 80-year-old.
Wow. How are your bones now?
It's completely reversed in the spine, and it's almost there in my hips.
Well done, you. Okay, so at this
Well,
point,
I spent a lot of hours lifting very heavy objects.
wait, Ruth, are you going to tell me, is the end result of this going to be everyone should be a power lifter?
Well, I did see a picture on my reels with someone with a barbell on their back, and it said, "Women need their iron."
All right, I see where this is heading.
So anyway, that's a piece of the puzzle as well. It's not just one magic bullet because life never works that way, either with the infections or with the osteoporosis or even the pH. It's one piece of the puzzle.
Got it.
So we think about the vegetables being more alkalizing. We think about meats and grains being more protein, but it's also acidifying. And it turns out that if you put somebody on a low carbohydrate and high protein diet, which you would think would increase the acid load, it turns out it doesn't really change the blood chemistry and pH hardly at all. But it does change the urinary chemistry. And so that's where I'm interested in this piece, dealing with chronic urinary tract infections and interstitial cystitis. They found that your magnesium levels and the citrate and the pH of your urine all go down. But the calcium and uric acid and phosphate all go up. And that's a concern for kidney stones, but I think it's also a concern for urinary tract infections. Certain pathogens like a high urine pH, certain pathogens like a low urine pH. And so if we start thinking about the all-American diet, okay, heavy on the carbohydrates, the grains, the pastries, the meat, the dairy, and cola, interestingly, pale beers, whatever, end up with a high acid load. And E. coli in particular likes a low urine pH. So why are women starting to get more and more urinary tract infections? Maybe it's because of the diet contributing to a lower pH and therefore E. coli flourishing. Whereas normally when the pH wasn't that low, the E. coli wasn't very happy. On the flip side of that, we have people who make too much ammonia because of their genetics. That ammonia raises the urine pH. And these are people who come back on their urine tests with a lot of Enterococcus, Pseudomonas, Morganella, Enterobacter's probably in that camp. And those are the persistent pathogens you find in their UTIs. Once again, that's a pH issue. Those pathogens just love a urine pH above 6.0.
So just to interrupt real quick and clarify so that people understand, what we're talking about here is the terrain of an individual.
Yes.
Hospitable to one kind of a bug versus another. And in this case, we're talking about pH being the thing, the level of acid in the urine, in the bladder, making it either more or less hospitable to a variety of different pathogens. And similar to, the conversation we had about H. pylori, like the acid level is going to influence how well that thing thrives there. So what I'm hearing you say is that there are some pathogenic bacteria that thrive at a very, very low pH, like an abnormally low pH, or which means high level of acid in the urine, and others that thrive in the opposite environment.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you. No. And we had the same situation in the vagina. So many women struggle with lots of yeast infections and chronic BV, bacterial vaginosis, which can be caused by a lot of different bacteria, not just Gardnerella. And it turns out that a normal vaginal pH, they say, ranges between 2.8 and 5. I think it should be closer to 4.0. And in my experience, those with bacterial overgrowth and candida had a high vaginal pH. And if we lowered the vaginal pH with boric acid or vinegar douching, the candida and the bad bacteria weren't happy anymore.
Yeah.
And we have the opposite problem. Occasionally, women are diagnosed with an overgrowth of the healthy bacteria. Well, if they douche with baking soda, something that will raise the vaginal pH, that knocks some of the lactobacilli back, so they no longer have an overgrowth. So instead of taking a lot of antibiotics, and a gazillion courses of fluconazole, diflucan, or Metrogel for your Gardnerella, maybe just altering the vaginal environment, the terrain, for the vast majority of people would be all that was necessary to get a healthy load of lactobacilli in the vaginal tract, which would prevent those bad pathogens from making their way from the vagina into the bladder.
I love it. I love that you're going to this level of detail. And I just want to, as a big picture pull away for people who are already lost and like, well, antibiotics work. Why wouldn't I? I just want to remind you that you're not doing your body any favors every time you give yourself an antibiotic, because you're shifting you're putting it, so you're nuking the territory, right? So a lot of healthy guys go down with the good guys. And if you think about it, it's, changing the pH using these simple natural remedies that Ruth is talking about is really no different from treating your pool chemically with things that raise or lower the pH, which, by the way, explode all the bad bacteria so you can swim in your clean pool, right? You are killing the bacteria by changing the pH. It's not that you're doing nothing to kill them. You're just changing the terrain, which then allows the natural healthy things to flourish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this pH balancing thing, I find very exciting. We know that antibiotics get overused. I do agree that there are times when they are medically necessary. But if you can fix a problem either without the use of the antibiotics or in a lot shorter amount of time, why would you not give that high ratings for the first approach? There was a real important piece of information I forgot to bring in, and I want to bring it in now. A lot of people, we were talking about the diet and making it more alkaline for osteoporosis. There was an article that did an extensive review of the literature, and not a single study could demonstrate that if you went on an alkaline diet, you would prevent osteoporosis.
Interesting.
And I know that's a common belief, and I've even got on my shelf here some books on osteoporosis, and that's the big overriding approach that they advocate, is stay on an alkaline diet so you don't get osteoporosis. Or if you have osteopenia, stay on an alkaline diet so it doesn't advance to osteoporosis. So I think that that's really interesting, because that is something that's commonly promoted in the medical community.
So is that to say that an acidifying diet would be better, or just that it's not really just about pH for the bones?
It's not about the pH primarily. There were some good studies showing that sodium, dietary sodium, you're talking to the gal who loves her corn chips here. Some people tend to crave sugar. I'm a salt person, and you find most people are either one or the other. But anyway, a lot of sodium in the diet will contribute to osteoporosis, particularly if you don't have enough potassium. And I find it really interesting that sea salt is 40% potassium chloride, not sodium chloride.
Interesting.
So if you do like your salt, getting sea salt, I think, is a good way to go, because it gives you more potassium, which makes the sodium not as harmful in your body.
Interesting. So
They also used potassium bicarbonate. Now, everybody's used to hearing about baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate, but there is a potassium bicarbonate. I found it on Amazon, and there was a study that they did way back in 1997, of all things, that showed that you can reduce the acid load. And I really think they're not just talking about the overall pH of the body, but perhaps in the urine and calcium dumping. Because of the potassium, they found an increase in growth hormone, which your body uses for repair work when you're an adult. Kids, growth hormone makes the kids grow. In adults, it does body repair. And it also increases osteocalcin, which is the signal that tells your body to make new bone.
Fascinating.
So I thought that was pretty interesting there. Other things that'll help modulate calcium dumping, boron. I've become a huge fan of boron. Reduces calcium dumping by 44%.
What? Okay, tell me how to use it then, because that's one of my favorite things to use for people with yeast overgrowth, but I don't know any other recipes than my, yeast stupefying tonic. So yeah, I want to hear your pearls on this one.
Well, there's a great article, easy title, remember, there's nothing boring about boron. And it has, about 10 different things in which boron, which also is depleted in the soils, by the way, but how boron helps with bone health. It stops calcium dumping, and it has a whole list of all the wonderful things in your body that it can do. Um, and so I've started on 10 milligrams a day. I know that some of the bone formula supplements have boron, but they don't have enough. The studies showed that you have to have at least 3 milligrams a day. I could make a case for doing the 5 milligram capsules, but if you're deficient and you already have osteoporosis, I think that the 10 milligrams once a day, which is a perfectly safe dose, would be a good recommended supplement amount daily.
Awesome. And borax, right?
Yes,
I
yeah.
mean,
Now, I saw some articles online where people are saying, oh, I just take borax. Well, when we traveled out west and I saw the bulldozers mining borax, I think you want food grade.
all right, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Cool. Thanks for that, taking out that little diversion with me. All right, let's get back to pH and application, because we've talked
Yep,
about kind of the knowledge, and actually we're sort of, even into the understanding. Like, how do we use this in daily life?
sure. Um, so the question is, well, should I make any diet changes? Should I take some additional supplements? What would help my body function better? First of all, because protein is acid forming, sometimes people have been told not to cut back on their protein. But it turns out that protein is actually necessary to prevent osteoporosis and a condition called sarcopenia, where older people start losing muscle mass. I will tell you from personal experience, you can put on muscle mass at any age. 5 years ago, I was 30 pounds lighter. And I would like to think that the majority of that 30 pounds that I put on is muscle mass currently. I've certainly gotten a whole lot stronger. So you can increase your muscle mass at no matter what age you are. And if you think about it, the muscles are what actually help the bone structures to stay in place and function well in your joints. There was some study that was done some years ago talking about women who weighed over 158 pounds, I think, were less likely to get osteoporosis. Well, if you're carrying an extra 5, 10, 20, 30 pounds around, that's putting a daily stress on your bones to cause it to put the calcium where it belongs, right there. You don't have to be overweight if it's muscle mass. Muscle mass is very compact, and you don't have to get a whole new wardrobe because you're muscle bound and look weird. You know, it's there are a lot of myths out there. Okay, I hope you realize I don't look overweight, even though my BMI might say I am.
No,
Um,
you're a felt badass 74-year-old powerlifter with 4 national records, to be clear.
well, you don't even have to lift the weights that I lift. I will tell you, I ran for many years thinking that would help increase my bone density, and it did. But every 2 years, my bone density would go up 1.5%. 2 years later, 1.5%. 2 years later, 1.5%. I still couldn't get out of the osteoporosis ditch I was in. I started powerlifting. The next year, I was 1 year into my 2-year cycle. The next year, when I had my bone density done, it had gone up 7%.
Wow.
The next 2-year cycle, it had gone up 4.5%. And I no longer had osteoporosis, but osteopenia. So
Wow.
it
So
can be reversed.
you graduated out of that high risk category. So I feel like this this conversation has now become more about powerlifting, which is valuable because you have to know something about me. I'm an exercise averse ex-athlete who recently has rediscovered, out of necessity, I've rediscovered swimming. So I've gotten back to my roots. And I feel really excited about the fact that I'm exercising because normally I avoid it as much as I can, but I feel proud of myself and good in my body, and I feel like I'm making lots of gains, but I'm not confident it's going to help me prevent osteoporosis.
It's not weight bearing.
I know, but I'm using those muscles like I have to be.
That gets some points.
I get some-
Absolutely.
Okay, but
Absolutely. I'm not going to discourage you from swimming if that's what's working for you,
that's
but
what's
maybe
working. I think
adding in some hand weights or something is a good place to start.
okay. All right. You're definitely convincing me. Okay, so
Okay. So we need adequate protein. And instead of reducing protein, increasing the fruits and vegetables for the potassium. Studies are showing us what's needed. I found it surprising that when they talked about vitamin D levels, they were talking about above 80. I've been promoting above 50. I've never seen any articles other than the one I was looking at in preparation for this that was recommending a level as high as 80. But it turns out the vitamin D helps with absorption not only of calcium, but also magnesium and phosphate. If you have a vitamin D receptor mutation, of which I have, orally you may not be able to get it up. PatchMD puts out transdermal patches with vitamin D with slow absorption over an 8-hour time period. You may have to find creative ways of getting your vitamin D up.
yeah.
I do want to kind of bring this around full cycle and talk about the chronic urinary tract infections and the vaginitis. First of all, you really have to know what your pH is and your urine and vagina, and you need some good testing to know what you really have. Not all bacterial vaginosis is Gardnerella. Not all UTIs are E. coli. And we can't make those assumptions. And particularly if you have the genetics that cause you to make more biofilms and you have chronic infections, it is likely that you don't have the standard pathogens in your coming back on more advanced testing. And I'm a big fan of PCR, next generation sequence testing through Microgen.
Yeah, and people, I think it bears saying right now, people will not get that test by just going to the doctor and saying, I have urinary frequency, or I have vaginal itching, or I have, they're not going to, doctors, this is one of those little rabbit holes I found my way into that Ruth dominates. She's like the owner of this rabbit hole. Okay. And
My privilege.
it's a rabbit hole that really, I think, understands the value of not only looking for way more than the traditional urine dip and urine culture will look for, because they're using PCR and they're looking for like 50,000 different species, right, Ruth? But it's also a test that is done after provoking the release of those pathogens by doing 5 days of heavy biofilm breakers, so that you're actually grinding through the biofilm on the inside of the bladder wall that holds all those pathogens in there, which is why they don't often come out on a urine test anyway, because they're happily living in their little biofilm communities. And so this is like both a destroy the community and then capture what comes out with this really high level, very sensitive, exhaustive test, right? So
Exactly. And I do want to also clear up one misconception. People get these urine dipsticks that look for leukocytes, which are white blood cells, and nitrites. Well, the assumption is if there are nitrites there, you have an infection. And if there aren't nitrites there, you don't have an infection. The problem is that many bacteria don't produce nitrites. particularly Enterococcus, which likes a high urine pH. You will come back negative for nitrites. And many doctors will say, well, then you don't have a UTI, not understanding that E. coli will produce nitrites, but Enterococcus and some of these other pathogens will not.
Yeah.
So you can't just depend on a dipstick to tell you whether infection is present or not. So that's why you need to test to know exactly what the pathogens are and a pH to know if the pathogens maybe could be discouraged by altering the pH. We need to normalize the pH. We mentioned for the urine, for the vagina, you can use the boric acid or the vinegar douching. And if you have an overgrowth, and the Microgen does the vaginal, it's a home vaginal swab test kit, by the way, that you can treat that by making it more alkaline. The urine pH can also be altered. We mentioned the potassium bicarbonate, or even baking soda. This isn't something you would do regularly, but you could certainly, if you came back with E. coli for 24 hours, get your urine pH above 7.5, and E. coli will not be happy. The vast majority of my patients didn't have a problem with E. coli because they didn't have an acid urine, because genetically they made too much ammonia. That ammonia would raise the urine pH, and predominantly we were looking at the problem of Enterococcus. And to clear the ammonia, you need a supplement called L-ornithine. You take that at bedtime. It binds up the ammonia. L-ornithine is something your body makes anyway to clear ammonia. And therefore, in the morning, your urine pH would be ideally down close to 6.0, and the pathogens that like a high urine pH would no longer be happy. So this is not intended to be a do-it-yourself, treat your UTI course. I'm saying we still need to know what the other factors are. We may need to know your genetics for the biofilm problem, but at least knowing that the pH is a huge player as to which bacteria, yeast like to show up and multiply, and how to discourage that, the pH is a very useful tool.
So I understand that it's not meant to be a DIY course. However, I like to leave people with, a little bit of a hand holding in case they need to, because here, the truth of it is not everyone's going to be able to find a doctor willing to test with Microgen. Those who do have access to you, correct? I mean, if that's how I found you, right? Is I had a patient come to me who said, I have this history of chronic UTIs my whole life. I've learned about this amazing woman, Ruth Kriz, online. Will you call her and let her guide you and me through this? And I said, heck yeah, always game to learn something new that will help a patient. And Matt, man, how grateful am I to that woman? Thank you. You know who you are if you're listening. Yeah, because I've learned so much and continue to learn so much. But a lot of people won't be able to find that. And so is it true to say that if someone went to the drugstore and they bought those little pH strips, they could pee on a strip right now, figure out where their urine is, and know whether they're within a normal range for urine, right? If they have no symptoms and they're in a normal range, nothing to do, perhaps. But if there are symptoms and they have a really, really high pH, they might assume, wow, whatever bugs are there are thriving in a too high pH. I should take some ornithine. And if they have a really low pH, meaning very acidic urine, and they've got, symptoms, they might say, wow, it would benefit me to bring my urine back into the normal range. I mean, could we go that far?
Absolutely. I would even go a little bit further and say, if there's nitrites, it's probably E. coli. And there is no problem raising that urine pH above 7.5 for, let's say 2 days. That should be enough to get rid of the E. coli.
Okay. And
yeah,
again,
here's another myth. I mean, everybody says drink cranberry juice. No, do not drink cranberry juice.
Is that because it doesn't work for everybody depending on the bugs, or is it because it's bad for everybody?
The way it became popular was because both blueberries and cranberries have a substance in it whose name I should remember that helps prevent the bacteria from
D-mannose? D-mannose.
attaching to the bladder wall.
Is it D-mannose?
No, it has another chemical in those two fruits that prevent bacteria from attaching to the bladder wall.
Okay.
That's why it became popularized.
Is it harmful to drink cranberry juice? I mean, cranberry juice presumably lands somewhere on that acid-base scale.
No, no. I'm just saying that that would not be the best approach for a UTI caused by E. coli.
By E. coli. Okay. And how do you bring, we talked about normalizing vaginal pH and addressing something that was too low, pH too low. How do you bring the pH up in urine?
And well, in urine, we're talking about that either soda bicarb or potassium bicarb.
Okay, so
And once again, we don't want to alter the gut pH long term. We're talking about 2 or 3 doses
okay,
of this. We're not talking about long term and altering your gut pH and setting you up for H. pylori.
perfect. Perfect. Well, this has been, as usual, illuminating. What else have we not discussed that would be important for people to walk away from this conversation having a little bit better handle on?
I will say one thing about the patients can order the microgen kits for themselves online.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Now, the issue is they will get the results. They will not get the antibiotic recommendations.
Oh, so they won't come with the sensitivities part. They'll just come when
Mm-mm.
bugs are there. Why would that be the case, given that they're not really able to order the antibiotics on their own anyway? What's a
I
microgen?
didn't make the decision, the powers that be at Microgen, and that may have to do with some regulations as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the things that I love microgen. It's like so comprehensive, but one of the things I take issue with is that they are only looking for sensitivities to or resistance to antibiotics. They're not talking at all about herbs or oxidative therapies or really any of the other potentially helpful things. Um, do you have any experience using some of those other things for UTIs?
Limited. I mean, we all know about E. coli being bound up by D-mannose. My experience is because of my population being chronic and the biofilm issue, that neither the D-mannose alone or the herbals alone were sufficient. They needed to do targeted biofilm disruption based on their genetics. And in spite of trying a number of herbal protocols, including Stephen Buhner's work, in combination with disrupting biofilms, it was never quite enough. So at the end of the day, most of the chronic population did need to use antibiotics, but with these tools, they're using them far less. For instance, I used to find enterococcus in over 90% of my patient population. Once we started checking their urine pH, first thing in the morning, by the way, because the ammonia is going to concentrate during the night. But if we check it first thing in the morning or in the middle of the night, if you're up, and bringing it down with the appropriate amount of ornithine that night at bedtime, so the next morning it'll be closer to 6.0. Now I'm only seeing enterococcus less than 5% of the time. So when I think about all those years that I fought enterococcus, both personally with months and months and months and months and months of antibiotic courses, and the same for my patients, now we're generally, by addressing the pH, can get rid of the enterococcus with one course of antibiotics.
Wow. Wow. Well, this is like reports back from life on the front lines of the cutting edge because like, you're learning this as you're making it up as you go based on feedback from how your patients do, because no one else is doing this, Ruth. And I want to thank you again for the work you do, for the trailblazing spirit you have, for the unstoppableness of your being. And also remind you that, like, as soon as your course comes out,
the ever elusive course, it's moving forward, and this pH information that I prepared for today is going to be integrated into those training modules for practitioners, because it is an important piece of the puzzle.
yeah. Well, thanks for the sneak preview. Like we've got like a little special advanced release copy of the pH chapter. Ruth, you're awesome. Thank you again. Is there any last thing you want to say to this group of people who are seeking tools to help themselves heal, to understand better why they're up against what they're up against in their bodies? Any last words of wisdom you'll share with us?
Don't give up. Don't give up. I mean, it took me a long time to get where I got. If I had just listened to the in the box medical community, I would have had an IC diet and had decades of chronic pain. And so by looking for the answers and being open to new ideas, even if it's not what you're hearing from the traditional urological community, you will get there. It is a process. Be patient with the process.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.